Welcome to this explainer. Jump right in with me to the early 19th century. Now, as a historian, when I look back at the scientific landscape of that era, it's pretty much exactly what you'd expect, completely dominated by wealthy, formally educated gentlemen. But here's the twist. The true pioneer of modern paleontology wasn't some aristocratic scholar in a fancy library. No, it was a working-class woman who braved sheer cliffs and treacherous tides. Her name was Mary Anning.
And her impact was so massive that the famous evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould once called her probably the most important unsung collecting force in the history of paleontology. Just think about that for a second. That kind of ultimate high praise isn't for an Oxford professor. It's for an impoverished, uneducated woman from the 1800s who quite literally revolutionized our entire understanding of extinction. It's absolutely fascinating how someone so completely shut out of the establishment actually forced them to rewrite the entire scientific rulebook.
So, let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. We'll start with her beginnings as the greatest fossilist, head out to the danger on the cliffs, take a hard look at the scientific boys' club she was up against, explore how she rewrote Earth's history, and finally wrap up with her lasting scientific legacy.
Okay, Section 1, The Greatest Fossilist. Our historical journey kicks off in the seaside town of Lyme Regis, back in 1799. This is where Mary was born into a family of laborers. Her dad, Richard, was a cabinet maker, and he actually collected and sold fossils to tourists just to help the family scrape by. But when he died suddenly, he left them in severe debt. So young Mary, who had learned the fossil trade from him, turned right back to the cliffs just to put food on the table.
Now, to really get why she was so incredibly successful, we have to talk about her workplace. She was excavating in what's known as the Blue Lias Formation. It's essentially this giant, ancient layer cake of limestone and shale that formed roughly 195 to 200 million years ago. It acted like a perfect time capsule for ancient Jurassic marine life. It was a literal gold mine for fossils. But, as we're about to see, extracting them was not for the faint of heart.
Moving on to Section 2, Danger on the Cliffs.
Looking at the daily reality of her work, you quickly realize this wasn't safe indoor science. This was a brutal, grueling matter of life and death. Fossil hunting wasn't some leisurely walk on the beach. She had to be out there in freezing rain and howling winds because those exact violent storms were what caused the cliff erosion that actually exposed the fossils. She was navigating these incredibly unstable, crumbling cliffs every single day. In fact, in October 1833, she was caught in a horrific landslide. She narrowly escaped with her life, but tragically, her loyal dog and constant companion, Trey, was buried and killed right in front of her. The physical toll she paid was just immense.
Section 3, the Scientific Boys' Club.
Because you see, dodging deadly rockfalls was literally only half the battle. As a historian looking at early 19th century records, the societal barriers she faced were arguably just as steep as those cliffs. The odds were so overwhelmingly stacked against her. She was a woman in a strictly male-dominated Victorian society. She was poor, working class, and sometimes even had to rely on parish relief to survive. She had basically no formal education, having only gone to a Sunday school to learn to read and write. Plus, her family were Protestant dissenters, which pushed them even further to the absolute fringes of society. And because of all these systemic barriers, she was officially banned from joining places like the Geological Society of London.
It is, without a doubt, one of the most glaring injustices of the scientific record. Mary was out there doing all the painstakingly dangerous work, excavating, cleaning, and preparing these incredibly fragile fossils. And yet, wealthy gentlemen geologists, guys who never once risked their necks on those cliffs, would just buy her specimens and routinely take all the credit in their published papers. They relied 100% on her anatomical expertise, but she was virtually erased from the official scientific record while she was alive.
Which brings us to Section 4, Rewriting Earth's History.
Even with all that marginalization, her discoveries were just too massive to ignore. She was quite literally digging up things that shattered how people understood the world. Just look at this timeline, it's wild. At just 12 years old in 1811, she excavates an ichthyosaur. In 1823, a complete plesiosaur. Fast forward to 1828, she finds Britain's first pterosaur, a flying reptile, and in 1829, a transitional fossil ray. Honestly, there wasn't a single formally trained scientist at the time with a resume anywhere near this good.
Let's zero in on that first huge find. Imagine being 12 years old and meticulously pulling this bizarre 5.2-meter-long sea monster out of the rock. You have to remember the context here. Finding a massive creature that no longer existed openly challenged the widely accepted biblical timeline that said the Earth was only a few thousand years old. People literally had no idea what they were looking at.
And then about a decade later, she hits them with this, a completely intact plesiosaur. This animal was so strange. Tiny head, incredibly long neck, and these weird turtle-like flippers. It was so outlandish that it sparked an absolute international uproar. I mean, the leading scientific minds of the day straight up thought it had to be a hoax, which actually led to one of the most famous showdowns in paleontology. Georges Cuvier, a brilliant French zoologist who's widely considered the father of paleontology, publicly accused her of faking it. He literally thought she glued different animal bones together. But Mary Anning wasn't having it. Relying entirely on her self-taught anatomical knowledge, she proved her specimen was genuine. They even held a special meeting at the Geological Society about it, a meeting she wasn't allowed to attend, of course. But in the end, Cuvier was forced to eat his words and admit he was wrong. The working-class underdog had completely bested the world's leading expert.
But her genius wasn't just about giant skeletons. She was actually a pioneer of trace fossils, too. She figured out that ancient squid-like belemnites had fossilized ink sacs. Local artists actually reconstituted the ink to draw her fossils. And even more importantly, she pioneered the study of coprolites, which is just the polite scientific term for fossilized feces. She realized these weren't just weird-shaped rocks. They held vital clues about ancient diets, allowing scientists to piece together whole prehistoric ecosystems.
Finally, Section 5, a lasting scientific legacy.
Mary tragically died of breast cancer at just 47 years old in 1847. But her intellectual contribution? It's off the charts. Her discoveries dragged a stubborn scientific community kicking and screaming into accepting that entire species could, in fact, go extinct. Before her, the mainstream belief was that God wouldn't let any of his creations just vanish. By providing irrefutable physical evidence of deep geological time and extinction, she laid the absolute critical groundwork for Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, which was published just over a decade after her death.
So yes, she was pushed to decide during her lifetime, but history is finally correcting the record. Today, the Royal Society celebrates her as one of the most influential women in the history of science. She's honored with this incredible bronze statue right out there overlooking her beloved, dangerous cliffs in Lyme Regis, and she is now globally and rightfully recognized as a true founder of modern paleontology. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a fiercely determined, uneducated teenager with nothing but a hammer and an unstoppable curiosity could completely shatter and rewrite the history of our planet, well, what other hidden truths are still out there just waiting beneath the surface for someone bold enough to look? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.